Hey there, friends. My name is Ann Calvillo, and welcome to Her Scars Tell a Story podcast, a safe space for women from all different walks of life and different backgrounds coming together to share their stories of God's redeeming love. So grab your cup of coffee and journey with us now. Hey there, friends. Welcome to Her Scars Tell a Story. I'm your host, Ann Calvillo, and today I'm with a very special guest. Her name is Christy H. Hi, Christy. How are you?
Hi, Ann. Thank you for having me today.
Oh, thank you for being a guest. Well, I know you took a little drive to get here. You got caught by a train, and that happens a lot here in Chicago, right?
Yes. Forever, never-ending trains.
Right? Can you tell us where you're originally from?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I grew up mostly in Pennsylvania, so East Coast girl from that side. Lived in, suburban outside of Philadelphia. I was the oldest of 6.
Okay. Can you tell us a little bit about what your home life looked like?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I grew up in a family where my parents are believers. I was raised to know God. They were connected in a church, and I was actually home educated from kindergarten through 12th grade. So that's kind of something unique about me. But also a short period of my childhood, we lived in Brazil. So my parents were missionaries there. I was very young, 4 years old to 7 years old. But I learned Portuguese. God used that a lot in my life to just open my eyes to God working in people different than me, different cultures, languages, and just to have that awe about how he works in different ways around the world. And then we came back when I was 7. And then kind of assimilated back into our everyday normal lives in the suburban middle class white America again. But that experience changed me, and it touched me a lot. So and then homeschooling all along, I always felt like a little bit of an outsider among even my church friends or, in my community. And so God, I think, used those feelings of inferiority or being different to draw me closer to him as I became a teenager and just struggled with feeling like an outsider. So, yeah.
And so you said you were the oldest of 6 siblings.
Yes.
Were they all homeschooled too?
Yeah. We were all homeschooled. I had
God bless your mom.
2 sisters, yes. 2 sisters and then 3 brothers that came along after. The youngest one was born when I was 17. So, yeah, and I was just heading to college, before he turned a year. So, yeah.
Wow, that's so cool. I admire women who homeschool. I don't think I could ever do that. That's not my gifting or anything, but I admire that. Growing up, what did you see when your mom homeschooled? What did you learn from her? What did you apply with your children now?
Yeah, I think I still have that, even though my kids go to school, and I have not felt that same calling. My mom is amazing. She was very administrative, knew exactly what needed to be done when, very organized. And so, we had a smooth, well-run household. And I know I benefited a lot from that style of education and learning. And I know they always loved the flexibility, to be able to have school and then to be able to say, we're going to do school different today. We're going to go on a field trip or, that counts as school. We're hearing that. Does this count as school? Or things like that. But I think it just gave a flexibility to learning, and also just realizing how, school isn't the only place learning takes place. It happens in so many different ways, and as you explore and as you do life together. So.
Yeah. Wow. And so you said you felt a little bit like an outsider. As a believer growing up in a Christian home, what did that look like?
I think for me, because I was homeschooled, I felt like I was missing something with my friends that were in school. So, and I was very social. So I always felt like I was missing out on social life, especially.
Okay. Yeah.
I think that was a big part of it. But too, just feeling different. I don't know why, but just those few years we were gone in Brazil, we came back And life was different. There were microwaves in every house. There were VCRs. My parents were getting ATM cards. They didn't exist before then. There was just a lot of pop culture too. I think that kids all of a sudden get in that age range, which I didn't realize. But yeah, I think it was just like I missed something, and that just became a part of my identity then for a long time.
Yeah. And then to Brazil, you said you had a chance to experience, just a different culture, a different way of life. How did that impact you growing up?
Yeah. At first, of course, I didn't speak Portuguese, the language, and then just learned it over time interacting with people. I went to the camps that my dad was Bible at a Bible Institute, so they had to pick up Portuguese pretty quickly, and so I guess we all kind of did. And then there would be camps that I would go to with other kids from, Brazilian kids. And so I learned the gospel, but I saw it being lived out and applied in cultures and lives different than mine. I got to travel a little and see things, and I think just see God move and work and see God's love change people, and me being a recipient of that too. So, yeah.
Growing up in a Christian home, you grow up knowing about the Lord and hear a lot of talk about having a relationship with God. When do you feel that your relationship with the Lord was established where you knew, like, I have a relationship with Jesus now?
I have a very specific memory of being 6 years old and by myself looking out the window in Brazil. Like we lived out in the countryside, so there were just tons of stars, like just seeing the Milky Way and just like feeling a conviction in my spirit that I have not fully put my faith in Jesus yet. And I want him to be the boss of my life. And so I remember at that point just doing it by myself. And that's always been a part of my story, but I probably didn't even tell my mom, the next day, I just, decided to put my faith in Jesus and that he forgave me of my sin and, I've been set free, but that's where it started. And of course, I think there's a lot of ups and downs in any person's life, as a new believer, a young believer growing. So I would, I don't say that the fruit really started to happen a lot until I was a teenager. And then, all those feelings of being an outsider, the comparison or the shame, that I experienced, I began to really seek God and to find an intimacy with him that I didn't have yet until then. And so I really think God used those feelings to draw me to him and to find what I didn't have in him. And I found his love was enough and that everything I was lacking, that he was enough for me. And God gave me good friendships that pointed me to him. I had some good experiences getting to do some youth ministry, like a missions trip to California when I was a teenager. I also went back to Brazil when I was 14 for a summer. And so God just used those experiences to draw me to him. So,
At any point along your walk, did you feel disconnected with God in your relationship with him?
Yeah, I think it's happened in different seasons in my life, and not just as a teenager, definitely as an adult too. I think I've gone through desert seasons and dry seasons where I just struggled or haven't heard from God, or I was going on my own way, where I wanted, either there were desires I had that were taking my focus off of the Lord, or I think that was definitely a real part of my life. And my personality is social, but I'm also very introverted. So it's easy for me to get overwhelmed. It's easy for me to get paralyzed and not feel like I can move forward because of either anxieties or way I compare myself to others, or ways that I seek to please other people instead of the Lord. And so I think those things have been areas of my life where I've had to definitely grow in, or, have had to come back to God and be like, God, I'm wrong. I know that you're enough for me. And I know that you accept me, for who I am. And I need to trust you and not in myself and my own strength.
We mentioned you're being homeschooled and now you're in college. what does college life look like? And when did you meet your husband?
That's always the question. I met my husband before college.
Okay. See, I'm glad I asked.
All right. So on that missions trip, I was 16 and he was 14. He was from Maryland and I was from Pennsylvania. We started out in California, and it was a missions trip to, it was a lot of ministry training, and we served to there was a fellowship of churches that we were both a part of. So we'd never met each other before then, but we came together with a bunch of other teens our age. We were trained in evangelism and doing children's outreach programs. And also we spent time traveling from church to church and just serving the church and encouraging the church in different ways. Sometimes it was doing a lot of work, like manual labor. Sometimes it was going out in the communities and inviting people to different events. But that's where I met my husband.
Okay.
We were not allowed to have any special interests or date on that trip. But that's when he says, I noticed her and I thought she's the one I want to marry. And I had noticed him at that point, and, we got to know each other, and we couldn't exclusively, pursue each other or, so we took the opportunities we could to have time to talk or to get to know each other. And then at the end of the summer was a youth conference we went to, and I found out that he confessed that he liked me there, and I think I told some friends the same. So,
Oh, okay.
so that's where we got to know each other, and we started writing letters because email was just starting to be a thing.
Yeah.
This is 1995.
Okay, yeah. It was just starting up. Yeah.
So, we wrote some letters, and then that was my senior year. I remember he wrote me one letter that he was dating someone. So I was like, oh, okay, I guess that's not anything.
Yeah.
Kind of all right. I was disappointed, but I guess I moved on. I was okay. And then I went to college. He was a couple years behind me, and he ended up going to the same college, which was a small Christian college in Indiana. That was also affiliated with our church. So,
Okay.
it was there. So you had asked about college too then.
Yeah,
so,
yeah.
It was an adjustment coming from homeschooling.
Yeah.
For sure. And a lot of it was just me learning to organize and keep myself on track with my grades and not all social life and, all those things. So it took a couple years, but I got in stride, and I saw God work so much through college. Even the process of deciding was so painful for me. How do you make that decision is very hard. And I've always been scared of big decisions. So just a lot of fears. So in that process, my dad lost his job my senior year, and I was telling the school, because, they always call, and I was like, I don't know if maybe I'll go this year. My dad lost his job, and I saw God work through that, though, because what happened was they were able to provide me with more financial aid than I would have received if he was still working. And I was actually ended up being able, probably even, received more assistance than I would have. So I was able to go. God provided even through that difficult experience. And then I wanted to do social work. That is just over time, God was working in my heart, opening my eyes through experiences in Brazil, seeing street kids, or I saw needs, and I wanted to meet them, or, I wanted to be a part of that. So I was like, I think I wrote on my college application social work, and Grace College didn't have social work.
Okay.
But I was like, well, maybe I'll try counseling or something. So my freshman year, by the end, they announced they were starting a social work program. So that was really encouraging to me. So wow, thank you, God. I know this is exactly what I want to do, so I signed right up for that program. So but college was a wonderful experience for me. And just building relationships, of maturing as a believer, of having an opportunity to do leadership in different ways, like as an RA. And we would take trips to Chicago and do ministry a couple months or a couple weekends a semester. So I did that as well. So
Okay. So your husband, he ends up going to the same college?
Mm-hmm. So he came along, I guess my junior year, he was a freshman, and we ended up in the same New Testament class. And he says now, he was very careful about picking his seat because they were assigned, or, I don't know. We had the same seats all semester, so he was right next to me. And I didn't realize he was still interested at that point.
Right.
But then my senior year, I think he was just like, I better make a move because she's going to graduate.
She's going to leave, yeah.
So then he invited me to homecoming. And that's kind of when, like, it was just neat. Like, it was good timing in my heart and life, too, just where I was at. Yeah. And so we just spent time getting to know each other more then. And I think we kind of started a relationship, but it was really stressful for me because, again, I was making a decision about where I was going to be after I graduated. And I remember having a very sad breakup for at that point. Again, it was a difficult timing. I was trying to seek God on where he wanted me to be. I didn't feel ready for marriage yet necessarily, and didn't want to lead him on if, I didn't know if he was the one or whatever. So yeah, we broke up then. And God had been opening opportunities in Philadelphia. There was a church that was, the people were aging. They'd moved out of the neighborhood. They weren't real connected to the community there anymore, even though there was a church building. Okay. And so they passed it on for a restart. And so it was about the time I was graduating from college. So I was so drawn to that idea of like moving into a neighborhood and, the church being around the corner from where you lived, and to be able to rub shoulders with neighbors and do ministry. And it just sounded like a really neat environment to do ministry. So I moved there. I got a full-time job in social work. And that was, I say, my boot camp to inner city life and just learning what families deal with in the city and the struggles that they face. And the neighborhood we were in was Puerto Rican and Dominican mainly, some African American, and a few Polish or Irish older white people that lived there. So that was my Philadelphia neighborhood. So
yeah, that's really interesting. So you grew up in this neighborhood. Now you're able to minister to the people in your neighborhood. Different cultures, different backgrounds, everyone, just kind of a mixed group of people, very diverse. I love that, by the way. What do you feel that you learned? What did you take away from that culture and people?
Yeah, I think there's just so much. It's hard to know how to sum it all up. Yeah. But I was just reflecting just this last week on, my child growing up, feeling a little bit of an outsider and not like I could relate, with the people around me. And I was like, I wonder if God used that in my life to prepare me for being around cultures that are different than me. I think by the time I got there, I was pretty comfortable with that idea of, just like, well, everybody's different, but God can work the same in all of them. And just having that faith to see that God can reveal himself to people. Yeah, it was just learning the Puerto Rican culture. Man, I love their culture so much. And I just love, they became dear brothers and sisters and family to us. And then we lived in Philly almost 20 years. So, and then I think I think we'll talk more about that transition, but moving to Chicago and learning Mexican culture. And I think I had a false assumption for a while, that Latino culture is kind of all similar, but no. Oh no. and so, I've learned, my Mexican brothers and sisters come from a very different place than my Puerto Rican brothers and sisters. And so it's been a journey learning, getting to know that too. And
that process. I feel like that's enriching. Mm-hmm. I feel like getting to know people that are not like you, getting to know the beauty of their culture, getting to know the way they connect and relate, and being able to connect and relate with them through Christ. Because as you mentioned, now we're brothers and sisters, but we get this opportunity to know this whole different way of life, and see God in the midst of that, in the midst of all of that, right? But go ahead.
Oh, yeah. It just, one verse that stuck out to me just over the years is from Ephesians, and it just talks about, I can't quote it specifically, but it talks about God breaking down the walls of hostility. And I think in Ephesians, he's probably talking more specifically between the Gentiles and the Jews, and how they are both part of God's new covenant in knowing Jesus, getting to witness that in our day and age now, and getting to see God break down walls of hostility between cultures is, I think, just one of the most beautiful parts of the gospel. Yeah. So like, that just gets me going. So I get really...
Talk a little bit about that, because you got me going. I want to hear more.
Yeah, because only outside of the work of God in someone's life, people have no reason to really pursue each other much. You know, there's, I think, the social good in it. Like when people get along, there's harmonious communities, and it's better for the children growing up. And if there's no violence, because people are loving each other and looking out for each other, obviously. But when Jesus comes into a person's life and he gives us that joy, that freedom, that forgiveness, so we can extend that grace to others. And that's what it is so much about cross-culturally, is because I need to know that the things that I've done that are wrong have been forgiven, so that I can extend that grace that only comes through Jesus to another person. I mean, it's like that in my family, you know, too. I'm always like, you know why I forgive you? Because Jesus has forgiven me. Yes. And I think that's what it has to be cross-culturally, because we're always going to offend each other, because we're different. We're different. You know, and there's different in different cultures. You know, we all have our priorities about what's important to us, or the way we want things, or the way we think things are best. And so, you know, it's very easy to just be offended, and or to like discount someone else, you know, because they're different. So I think getting to be a witness and getting to experience that in my life has just been just such a joy to me. And I mean, I have so much to learn. Like I'm sure, like, I don't know if I've always done the greatest job of like actually working through all of because reconciliation is hard, you know, and it takes communication, and it takes work, and it takes perseverance, and it takes, just not giving up and saying, God, like being committed to that process of loving another person. So and I know that brings God glory. So that's something that just excites me about getting to live among people different than me. Yeah.
And I think that, you know, you, like you mentioned, you were living in Philadelphia, then you married, right? And then how long, you said you lived there 20 years, and then you all moved out to Chicago. So what was that like, Philadelphia and now Chicago?
You know, I'll just take a minute to say this, because this is just something that's like impressed me over and over in my life. Is be careful what you vow in your life that you will never do, because God has a way of turning that around. Yes, he does. Over and over again. So funny things like, okay, so I lived in Brazil. I learned Portuguese. So to me, Spanish always gave me a bad taste, because I learned Portuguese. They're similar, but they sound different, you know? And so I remember at some point being like, I never want to learn Spanish. Yeah. And then, that God changed that. So I am still learning Spanish, and you know, that's a big prayer request of mine, that I would finally be fluent. I've been working on it for a long time. But another thing is, I vowed that I would not parallel park, because it is just too hard. I don't like it. It's scary. God also, in that situation, he just changed my heart, because I wanted to go to Philly. I started developing a love and a heart for Philly. And if I was going to go to Philly, I was going to have to parallel park. And so I remember the first time I drove down by myself, I ended up like 3 blocks away from where I needed to be, because I was looking for a spot I could pull into. But, you know, over time, it wasn't a big deal, and I became a parallel parker pro. I've gotten rusty these days, but I used to pride myself on being able to get into very tight spots.
I feel like even in Chicago, especially if you live in areas where there's apartment buildings, you know, and I feel like the parking is very limited. So if you're not saving your spot, it's a tight squeeze, and you just gotta somehow maneuver into it.
That's right. Not cause any dents or scratches. Right. Yes, but that's what I was gonna say, was Chicago was never on my radar. I never thought, someday I just want to live in Chicago. We were in Philly. I was we were committed there. Like I was there. I'm here until God leads me somewhere else. I knew not to say I'm here forever because I know that God often makes changes and transitions in our lives. But I was comfortable there. I was happy. I felt committed, and I loved the community and the neighbors and the ministry we were a part of. So that was never, Chicago wasn't on our radar at all. Living in the Midwest. It's colder here.
It is really cold. Ooh, frigid cold.
Yeah. But that, and that there were a bunch of things that happened in Philly that started to make us realize that maybe that opportunity and that time that we were there was changing. And it wasn't a place where we felt like God was calling us anymore, and there must be something new for us. And there was a lot of heartache and a lot of just process that went on in all of that. Through that process, God worked in us and just kind of confirmed again, his faithfulness and his goodness to us. And we went through a process of like, God, where do you want us? And we looked. My husband had some relationships with New Life here in Chicago, and began reaching out and setting up times to visit, and in a couple other places too we looked into. And it just became apparent it was pretty quick, a couple of months, that this is where God was leading us and opening the way for us. So it was, in all of that journey, it was painful. There was a lot of heartache for me in letting go of Philly and what God was doing there, but it was also a process of refining me, because I didn't realize all the hopes that I'd put into my work and into the ministry, which are good things, but they aren't things to base your hope in. And it was a process of learning, no, my hope needs to be in Christ alone. And life changes, ministry changes, God's works in different ways in different seasons. And so there was a time of just like stripping away and of just kind of, sometimes it left me feeling unsteady or unsure, because I also, you put your identity into what you do. And so when what you do changes, you're like, it can be a little unsettling. But it was a good process, because it reminded me, oh, my home is in heaven, so even though my home is changing, I know I'm secure in him, and I know where I will always be. And also what I do, my identity shouldn't be based on that. It's based on my relationship with Christ. So there was just definitely a period of time of just being reshaped and reformed in that and reestablished in him before we moved on to ministry. We had a year where we moved to Chicago, and we didn't have to be like any kind of leadership or responsibility in that way. And it was just such a good healing time for us, a time to pause, a time to put our eyes on Jesus and just kind of say, okay, we're here. We're trusting you for what you have for us. That year was when Chicago, 2019, I think the winter, it got down to negative 22.
Oh my goodness. Oh no.
So it was, that was
you
like,
it was like culture shock. Yeah. Right. Like, whoa, what is this?
I'm not sure I even really set foot outside those couple days.
Yeah. I don't blame you. I don't step foot out when it's that cold.
Yeah. But even the negative 14 days.
Oh, I know. Anything below zero, I'm just like, I really question it. Do I go out there or not? Or do I hang out under this blanket? What do I do?
It seems a little dangerous.
Yeah. Seriously. And then the older you get, your bones tell you.
Yeah.
So then you move out to Chicago. Tell us a little bit about your family. How many children do you have?
Yeah, we have 5 kids. The youngest was born in 2018, the year we moved to Chicago. So, he just turned 5 now. So we've been in Chicago almost 5 years, and it's crazy for me to think about. He was born in Philadelphia, but that's not part of his identity at all. Chicago is. Yeah. He's a Chicagoan. That is interesting to think about. We bring him back to visit Philly, and he gets to see, I was like, oh, there's the hospital where you were born, and, there's the Independence Hall and the Liberty Bell, just things that are part of Philadelphia where he was born. So.
Yeah. And how did your kids do with the transition?
Different ones took it differently. So when we initially presented the idea to them, we just kind of asked for their input. Hey, you guys, God called Abraham on a journey.
Uh-huh.
And what do you think if God called us on a journey? And they were all in, very excited, ready for the adventure. Our oldest at that time was, he was probably 11. And so they were excited. But when it did come down to actually leaving, their roots, their home that they've been born into and grown up, there was one of my kids it was very hard on. So there was definitely times of just deep struggle in getting comfortable with Chicago, of so many friendships and people that were like family to us that we had left behind. So that was difficult. It was difficult. But God provided a school that was very similar to the one they went to in Philly. And so that, in that way, I think that was such a blessing. And then there were families that would just, like, either from church or from school, that would be like, hey, come over to our house. And so we just felt so much of God's grace in that transition, just him providing for us and, new relationships and just confirmation, of us being here and new and not knowing anything and getting used to a new place. And
That's so awesome. I feel like, you transitioned out of a place that was home. And like you said, you went through this refinement process where the Lord was showing you home is with me. Home is always going to be with me. No matter where you go on this journey, wherever I send you, home is with me. And then now you bring your family here to Chicago, right? Everything's so different, right? Even just relationships and friendships, now having to start brand new all over again. Tell us what community meant to you here in Chicago.
Yeah, that was an interesting transition because we came from the neighborhood in Philadelphia was all row homes, and we would see our neighbors all the time. Like they would, in the summer, they'd be sitting out on their steps. So you would just, like my husband, he walked to work 2 blocks, but it would always take him at least a half an hour to get home, his commute home, because he would get stopped and he would talk to so many people.
Along the way.
So we were used to a very tight-knit community. We were in the inner city, but it was like a small town in the way people connected and related and cared for each other in that way. So coming to Chicago, it was different because we were in Humboldt Park our first year, and the houses are kind of set apart. There's more apartments. And so we didn't see people outside. It was a little harder to get to know people for us. And then we were going to church, not right in the neighborhood. So I think we were it took a while for us to get our bearings here. It's a different culture. It's a different city. I think I had expectations of Chicago being the same as Philadelphia in that way, and just being able to relate and connect within the community, but learning that, no, God still works here, and he still does amazing things, and he still works through relationships, but we're going to find those a little differently than we did in Philly. And then we, about a little less than a year, we moved down to Gage Park, so on more southwest Chicago. The neighborhood there's still some apartments, more houses. The block that we were on had a lot of families that had been there for like 30 years. And so that was kind of reassuring to us, that there were some roots put down there, and that we were going to be able to build some relationships with neighbors. And so we've been able to do that there. And that's been some sweet grace in our lives of just getting to be able to, get to know our neighbors and connect with them more.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And so you and your husband, you pastor a church. Tell us what that looks like, ministering to the neighborhood you moved into. As you mentioned, it's a lot different than Philly. You were ministering to a Puerto Rican, Dominican community, and now you're here in Chicago ministering to Mexican community. So tell us, what does that look like?
So that first year we just began to pray, and then in January the church has the month of the 21 days of praying and fasting, and so our heart desire was just asking God, where would he have us during that month? And by the end of that time, we had a pretty clear picture. There was an opportunity for us in Brighton Park, which is just right above Gage Park. So as we visited the neighborhood and just prayed about it, it was exciting for us. And we were excited to get to be there. There was already a Spanish congregation in that building, but there had been an English, but it had not continued. I think it had been like at least a few years since it had been there. So they were asking us to restart an English service there. And so God provided and led. So we had the opportunity to launch in November of 2019. Yeah. And then, we had moved the summer before down to Gage Park before that, a few months before that. And we love Brighton Park, the community and the neighborhood. Something that was challenging almost off the bat is we launched in November and then COVID came around by March.
Oh my goodness. That's
so,
right.
Yeah. So that kind of felt like a little bit of a setback to us. We had to think about, ministry online, what does that look like? But God provided and was faithful through those seasons, and we learned, to adapt and do small groups online and to try to stay connected with people differently. Yeah. Our heart is still to really connecting with families and children in the neighborhood, and that's been a little bit of a slower process due to COVID. But my husband was able to get a teaching job in the neighborhood. Yeah. So he's in a school and gets to know families, and he's going to coach a flag football team this spring.
Oh, okay.
So and we're just, we've learned in Chicago too, your ministry season is really the warmer months.
Yes, it is. You're right.
So we spend all year talking about what we want to do in the summers.
Yeah.
So last summer we got our feet wet, literally. We did a water park, a program with water games for kids and families in the neighborhood. And that was a success and really neat to see families come out and enjoy that. So we're excited to try just some more outreaches like that this summer and in the park near our church. And I'm excited to do more prayer walking and praying for the community and just seeing who God puts in our path as we're out there. So I'm really excited to continue to dig in Brighton Park and see God work and who he brings our way. So
that's always so exciting. And I think that COVID kind of interrupted a lot, right? Mm-hmm. It interrupted a lot. But I love that you and your team, the team of people that the Lord has put together there at Brighton Park, just have a heart for this community, have a heart to see change, have a heart to see the Lord just move in the lives of people there. I think that's wonderful. You coming from Philly, you and your husband coming from Philly, bringing your family here, and saying, you know what, we're going to trust the Lord. He's planted us here, and he's going to use us as vessels in this community that we're very new to, right? And then because things were kind of interrupted because of COVID, now you're getting reacquainted again with the community. And so just seeing what the Lord is doing through your lives, through your obedience in making a big move like that, because that's not easy. That's anyone who has family and children. That's not easy. You have to know it's a call from God. You have to know that the Lord is calling me here, and he's purposed us to do his will here for whatever that looks like, right? So are you currently facilitating in your women's ministry? Is that what you're doing right now?
Yeah, we've had life groups, and we changed over to doing it's more of a family focused time. So every other week we meet and we do a meal together, and then we divide in groups. So I'm leading a women's group, and then the men get together, and there's things for kids and teens. So that's been just really neat to see who God's brought. Even through COVID, some people joined us on Zoom, and then they come to our church, now that we meet in person, and it's just I've learned so much in ministry. I still struggle with when someone would come to faith, just wanting to see them grow, wanting good things. Yeah. But it can easily turn into my desires and control, because I want to see just a forward progress. And sometimes it's more of a, zigzag. It is. Yeah. And so that's like the verse in 1 Corinthians 3, in 6 and 7, it talks about how, I planted the seed, somebody else watered it, but God made it grow. Yes. And that verse gives me comfort. It reminds me of my role, that I don't change people. God is the one who does that work. And so just trusting God to do that. And one of the neat things that's happened the last couple of months, we've been doing a food distribution once a month for the community. And a lot of the people that come out are actually Mandarin Chinese. They speak Mandarin Chinese. And so we've just been like praying about opportunities to be able to reach that group of people because we don't know Mandarin. And
That's exciting.
But it's a growing population in our neighborhood. And so there are no Chinese churches that we know of right in the neighborhood. And so we just began praying that God would provide someone who could maybe lead a Bible study. And we'd had another church, Chinese church, that was helping us with the food distribution. And through connections with them, they've provided a couple of people that come to our family groups and have just in the last couple of times we've met, started a Chinese Bible study too.
Oh, that is so awesome.
The first one that we had, the lady brought some fried rice, and which my son thought she said fireworks. He's like, I think Miss May must have left her fireworks at home. And we're like, no, she said fried rice.
Wishful thinking.
I know. He's like, maybe she'll bring them next time. So he's still waiting for the fireworks. At life groups inside. I don't know, but it's so funny.
That's so cute. But yeah, so I don't know. As I'm listening, I'm just intrigued by the community that that you minister to. Like it's growing and changing, evolving.
Yes.
And it seems like the Lord's doing the same in your life. Like he's growing, changing mindsets, opening your perspectives, like, you know what I mean? Like just changing things so that as the community changes, you're prepared to receive whoever comes through your doors, through those church doors. That's beautiful. And I think we all need to be prepared because at times we're not.
Yeah.
But when we're equipped to welcome people that are a lot different like us, and I think that you've had a lot of practice in that where you've been just, changed from community to community. And now here's another change. But change is good. I know change can be challenging, but I also believe change is good because God's constantly working. God's constantly just moving and transitioning us and growing us in our walk with him.
There was something I'd heard. I don't know if you've heard of, she's an author. She lived through the Holocaust. Her name is Corrie ten Boom.
Yeah.
she just has this little, I don't know if it was in her book, The Hiding Place, but she talks about how our lives are kind of like a tapestry. And when we look at it, we see it from the underside that just like looks messy and stringy. There's a lot of colors, but everything's kind of knotted and you can't really make sense of it. But from God's perspective, the other side, it's a beautiful, piece of artwork. And I think that describes our lives so much and how God works in us and in ministry and life in general. Is from our perspective, it can be confusing and disorienting, we're in the middle of it. Yeah. But we know that we can trust God that he's doing something good on the other side.
Yeah. And I love that you mentioned that. Yeah. I think that going through transition in life, going through those moves in life really just draws closer to the Lord, more reliant and dependent on him, trusting him in the midst of the move and in the uncertainty of life, and trusting that he's got it all worked out. He knows the plans that he has for us, right? And trusting him there. I do want to ask you, as I ask all my guests, what would you say to a woman who may be going through something that you've gone through in your life? I know you talked about feeling a bit on the outside growing up, and with all this change, I'm sure, it's still somehow there, that feeling of being an outsider. And then also speak to that woman who's going through a possible move and is really praying about it, or a big transition in life and is really kind of just praying on it. What would you say to that woman?
Yeah, I just think about my anchor. Like, no matter in the ups and downs, I think, Jesus calming the storm and the waves, I can get easily focused on the craziness or the chaos of life and look at the size of the waves and feel like I'm sinking. And so I think there's been a lot of times in life, whether it's been in transition or just day-to-day life stuff too, where it can feel that way and it can be paralyzing. But I think one thing I've learned about getting through those times is to turn your eyes back toward Jesus and hold onto his word, because he is the one that anchors us. It's our continual seeking after him, of placing ourselves under the truth of God's word, that keeps us anchored and stable on the solid rock. So he's our safe place, our refuge. I've been studying Psalms a lot this year, and we've been going through it in our women's group. You just see that testimony over and over again of, real life struggles, real life fears. David speaks very candidly about so much of those ups and downs of life. But what he always comes back to is his hope in who God is, and that God never changes, even when everything else around us is changing. So he's our solid rock. Yeah. And so I think that's what I would say to any person going through these kind of ups and downs in life or transitions, that there's just so much uncertainty in our lives. And if we base our security in trying to find certainty, we're going to be unstable, knocked off our feet all the time. Right. Because that's what happens. Yeah. But when our anchor is in him, and we know that our hope and our future is with him, and that he will never leave us or forsake us, he's given us that promise for those that have a relationship with him. I think that is an amazing promise. Like, that just gives us so much comfort in the middle of everything.
Yeah, it does. It sure does. Yeah. Knowing that I can trust, knowing that God's word will never fail. Mm-hmm. Things may fail, situations may fail, people may fail, but God's word never, never, never fails us. And we can grab a hold of that. Yeah. That renews our hope. Mm-hmm. That renews our trust in him, that no matter what happens, I love that you said to be anchored on him, because we so need to be anchored on him, because those waves come crashing, and they come hard. Yeah. And they come hard at us, and it looks so different to each one of us. Mm-hmm. But it's when we're anchored and we know, Lord, you're with me, and I'm not alone. Yeah. And even if, Lord, my hands slip from that anchor, you're holding on to me. I can trust that you're holding on to me, and you've got me, and you're here, and you're with me, as your word tells me you are. Yeah. And it's that confident hope to know that no matter what's happening around us, he's with us.
In a practical sense, something that I've learned to do, and I think maybe someone gave me this idea from somewhere, I can't remember where, but is just in those times where I feel paralyzed and overwhelmed, journaling is something that I continually come back to as a way of just like processing and organizing, of putting my eyes back on Jesus. But what I would do is just like take every single thing that is overwhelming me at that moment and write it all down. And that becomes my prayer list. And often they're pretty specific things, whether it's, behavior with one of my children that I'm just asking God to work in and change and use me in that process, or whether it's just some kind of challenge that's going on at church. I just write all that down, and then I take it before God and pray through that whole list. And I just find such a burden lifted in that process. Yeah. So that's something I've gone back to over and over again, is like, okay, if this is so overwhelming to me, like I can't even like function in my life because these things are just, on my mind. Like that's a call to me that I need to take that to the Lord in prayer and give that up to him. And I've just felt so much comfort in that process. And what I find every time is that he restores me. He sets my feet on a solid ground again, because he's always there, and he's always my sure foundation. It's just I forget. Yeah. So yeah.
And I think that as believers, we do tend to forget. The Bible says remember in it so many times, and Paul's always reminding the believers, remember, and God's also remember, because we tend to forget. But I love that he's aware of that. He's aware that we tend to forget. He's aware that there are seasons in life where we struggle to believe and have that faith, that measure of faith to fully trust him. And we tend to lean in on our own understanding and rely on our own strength, when clearly he's like, trust me, rely on me. And we go through things that shape us and form us. We go through things, through tests, right? I mean, like you mentioned, the refining, where he draws us back to him, and he gives us clarity of mind. He gives us clarity in our focus, you know, where things were foggy and things are like, I don't know what to make of this. He gives us clarity through his closeness, his love, and his presence, and through his word.
Yeah. A verse in my life that's really brought me back to him over and over is Hebrews 12, 1 and 2. And it talks about like fixing our eyes on Jesus, who's the author and perfecter of our faith. And I love the word fix, because I try to fix myself all the time. And I get so frustrated. I feel so much pressure to do that sometimes, you know, like to do things right or to make the right decision, or, you know, I get afraid of failing. And that verse right there just reminds me of who fixes me. It's not me, Jesus. Fix your eyes on Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith. And so it reminds me that he's the one that gives me faith, that he's the one that's going to perfect me. And so it just caused me to put my eyes back on him.
And that's so liberating. It's so liberating, and it gives you such peace. It gives me such peace to know that I don't have to fix myself. You know, I'm like, whew, that takes the pressure of trying to fix myself off. You know, and say, okay, Lord, I know you're working in me. I know that you're what we call sanctifying me. You're working in me. I'm a work in progress, Lord. I'm a piece of clay and you're molding me, Lord. And not having that pressure or that fear of failing him, because I know who's in control. And I know who's working in me, both to will and to do according to his wonderful purpose. You know, in every season of life, like God is so good.
He is so good. Yeah. I think the more you grow and age, like that becomes such a precious gift as a believer, because you've been through things and God has proven himself faithful over and over again. And so it gives you a growing confidence that, like, okay, no matter what comes, he's my anchor. He's still there, and he's faithful. He's good. Like, we can depend on him, you know, and it's been proven over and over again in my life and in all the believers around me, as I get to hear the stories that are shared of other women you've talked to. It gives me goosebumps.
Me too.
Just that comfort and that sustaining presence he has in our lives. Never to not leave us, to not forsake us, to provide, to be faithful, even when we go through trials. Being a believer doesn't take away. We know the story of Job, to know that can happen, that loss or tragedy can happen to anyone, but to have God's presence in your life through it is an amazing comfort.
It is. Chrissy, thank you so much for joining me today and just sharing your story, parts of your life with me and our listeners. Thank you for sharing what it is growing up Christian and what that looks like. As we talked before, I know my children as well grew up, they're second generation Christians, and a lot of times they feel like, well, I don't have a story, but you clearly do. You clearly have a story. I know my kids clearly have a story. And I know every believer has a story, the story of Jesus Christ. See, that's our story. Our stories are just interwoven into the greatest story, which is the story of Jesus Christ. I just want to go ahead and thank our listeners. Thank you for tuning into this episode of Her Scars Tell a Story.